provides healing for all the plagues, all the epidemics of Ikvas of the Mashiach, what happens around the times of Mashiach. Now, the plague with Ikvas of the Mashiach, some of them are Gashmi-Yazdika plagues, Tzoris. But the plagues that we face are Ruchni-Yazdika plagues. And the B'zusha Hana Poller said that the medicine for all the plagues is the Tanya. I remember years ago was a Bocher interviewed Harav Mendel Feldman, Allah Shalom. Rabbi Mendel Feldman was a Talmud Chacham. He was a God. I think he was a Shasian. He was Rabbi Eli Simpson, Rabbi Eliyahu Simpson's son-in-law. He was and he was a Rav in Baltimore. I was in Baltimore many times, and they always tell us how he davened in another shul, but he was come to Lubavitch to Fabreing and Upgaben Zik Medanash. And they interviewed Mendel Feldman, Allah Shalom, in the Karabad magazine. And they asked him, if you want to be Makadav to Yiddishkeit, what do you do? It's very simple. You open up a Tanya and you learn. Why does the Tanya work? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't. Just like it doesn't make sense that if a boy opens up a Tanya in a yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael or in Borough Park or in Williamsburg, they kick him out of yeshiva as if he's reading up a course. It doesn't make sense. When you learn the Tanya, it touches the neshama. Tanya is alkus. Is the mayon itself in chutza. That's metayr b'mashu. It's metayr b'zeichel. There's no agbolas. Tanya is very special. But okay, so I got a call from someone this morning. I have this person, this typical story, very intelligent but can't read Hebrew, wants to learn Chassidus but not Tanya. What should they learn? You should learn Tanya. Yeah, but she said she has a class in Tanya. She had a class for 100 years in Tanya. She won't finish with the Tanya. The Tanya you can't finish. The Tanya you learn. I heard, this is before my time. I don't remember this. But way back, and this goes on for decades, the Yuds and the Chofs, I mean, my earliest recollections are the middle Lamids. But the Rebbe's come into davening, the Rebbe done very quickly. So either the Rebbe would start and go very quickly till Shechanad and wait for the Chazan, or he would start late, and the Rebbe would stand in Shul and blätter a Tanya, look through the Tanya, einmal, zweimal, 100 mal, 1000 mal. He would look through the Tanya. That's what the Rebbe did. And he did it in public. Now, the Rebbe, of course, didn't want to, quote, waste his time. But the Rebbe didn't have to blätter a Tanya in front of everybody. You can't finish learning Tanya. You can't finish letting the Tanya touch you, because that's what the Tanya is. It's Teresh B'Ksav of Chassidus. And in it you have everything. And the Ikir is that it has the Koyach key. It has Sameh Malpe. It's a medicine. Tanya is a medicine for every klipper. A fellow called me, and he told me that he has someone that he's involved with, who's been from his whole life, actually. And he said he has huge faith issues. He's still from, but he has huge immune issues. So he called me. You understand? That's how desperate the generation is. So I told him two things. The number one, you have to check on his kashrus. Maybe there's a change in his standard of kashrus. There's a story from the Rambam, which is brought in the Baal Shem Tov Sforim. Baal Shem Tov said that there's a letter that the Rambam wrote to a Kehila Kadisha B'Yisrael that were very makusha, they're very connected to the Rambam. The Rambam, of course, wrote his Sforim and was immediately mafasim. The Rambam didn't write books to be, a great scholar. The Rambam wrote books like a Rebbe because the generation needed them. And one of the earliest works that the Rambam wrote is his commentary on Mishnah, maybe the first. The Rambam's Pirush HaMishnayos was written when he was less than 25. And it's an unbelievable work. I mean, the Pirush HaMishnayos, the introduction alone, the Hagdama to the Mishnah is a Sefer B'fnei Atzmei. The Hagdama to Pirkei Avos, the Shmeina Prakim, it's not a Sefer B'fnei Atzmei. It's a library B'fnei Atzmei. And then you have the Hagdama to Perek Chelik, the Sanhedrin, where the Rambam has the Yud Gimel Ikrei Amunah and the idea of Eilam Haba and Schar and Einish. It's also it's extraordinary. Those three pieces of Pirush HaMishnayos can define a person's whole life on every level. Anyway, so he has 13 principles of faith. The Rambam wrote Yud Gimel Ikrei Amunah. And of course, the 13th of the 13 principles of faith is Tchis HaMeis. This community was very attached to the Rambam. So they wrote the Rambam a letter and they write like this. They believe the first 12 Ikrim. They're having a difficulty believing in Tchis HaMeis because it doesn't seem possible, it doesn't seem plausible. And they want to know how terrible it is in terms of their theology. The meaning of an ikid is you can't be frum without it. If a person keeps Shabbos, but he just doesn't believe in God, otherwise it's not Shabbos. I check it. Yishanuk mitzveisav v'tzivonu. Right? It comes from the Meibishter. But if you don't believe in Tchias HaMesim, what's going to happen? So the Rambam answers them with a letter that the fact that they have a difficulty with Tchias HaMesim is a proof that they're not eating kosher. Why? Because to have a munah, which is l'mayla min haseichel, which is above human intelligence, you have to have a pure goof. And kosher food affect the purity of the goof, and non-kosher food contaminate the goof, and it becomes very difficult for the person, neshama, the Ram doesn't use language like that, neshama, for the amunah to come through. So it must be that they're not eating kosher. And then they did a search, and they found out that the whole city was eating teif, and it affected their amunah. The Frierdiker Rebbe writes that amunah can be affected by cholavakum. You know that? Cholavakum, it's 100% kosher. But the Yid did not watch the milking. Cholavakum is metamtem ameach valef. If he's a mind with the Frierdiker Rebbe, he brings a story, I think, from the Alten Rebbe. We're not talking about treifa milk. Cholavakum is a gzeira that the Chacham made that you're going to mix pig's milk with cow's milk, which is why there's no din of cholavakum on gvina, on butter. Because I think it means butter. So whatever the Hebrew word is, because you cannot make butter from treifa milk. It simply will not congeal. It won't harden. It's a physical mitzias. But milk you could mix. So the shaila becomes, what if you know 100% for sure that it's cow's milk? So the teretz is, once the Chachamim said that chalav shechalav yakum, milk that was milked by a goy, when you didn't watch the milking, you shouldn't drink it. So now it doesn't matter if it's pig's milk or it's not pig's milk. The Chachamim said you shouldn't eat it, and it's betamto meir valev. The Frierdiker Rebbe said Namaymet. There's a story with Alter Rebbe. Someone had an issue. I think it was a munah issue, and the Alter Rebbe said he drank cholavakum. Not that the milk was treif, but it was cholavakum. Cholavakum, once the Chachamim made the gzeira, is treif. So anyway, if a person has issues in amunah, the first place to look is kashrus. The Rebbe spoke about Nafshalam and Hey. When the Rebbe made miftzah kashrus, that's what he said. But the reason they made miftzah kashrus and miftzah taras hamishpacha is because these two miftzoyim, these two things, touch the neshama. Kosher and taras hamishpacha affect the mahus of the person in a subliminal way. So on the outside he looks like everybody else, but the neshama is challenged. That's what the Rebbe made. Is a special made. They made one fabrengen in the 3 weeks in 1975. Tashon Lamed Hey. And the Fabrengen is muge, it's printed in Lakut Asichas Chelik, the whole Fabrengen is edited. And apparently the reason for that Fabrengen was to launch these two Mivtzoyim. And the whole Fabrengen the Rebbe spoke about, and we brought from Sifrei Musa, Sifrei Chkire, how Kashas and Taras HaMishpach affects the Neshama, the Emunah. But okay, so I told him we should check out his Kashrus. And then I said, learn Tanya with him. He says, a lot of people don't want to learn Tanya. Why? Tanya is for beginners. I'm an advanced. The Maisa is, in Tanya, you have a lakus. The emes is, in terms of a limud, you can learn and learn and learn and never finish with the Tanya intellectually. But in terms of Tanya touching the neshama, it's ain't safe. There's no question about it. Okay, so I already started the class with a digression, so I'm on form. Now we can go to the class. We are holding Pedig Beis. Let's go. We're going to start Umasha Kosav B'Zeyar U'B'Zeyar Chodesh, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines from the top of page Zayin, that means page 15, right after the bracket. The last class and a half, the last 2 lessons that we had, we talked about the inyan of a Talmud Chacham, of a tzaddik, of a rebbe, of a Rosh Yalfa Yisrael, based on the principle that all neshamas are connected, but that the nature of the connectedness of the neshamas is that it's a pyramid. And lower neshamas literally come from higher neshamas. And this is the pshat that the mitzvah saseyu l'dof kobei. You have to cleave, you have to attach yourself to the Eibishter. And the Gemara says, how do you attach yourself to the Shechina? The Eibishter dach eish, the Eibishter is fire. And the Gemara answers, had big v'talmidei chachamim. Attach yourself to a Talmud Chacham. So again, in the Nigler, had big v'talmidei means do things to be involved with him, being mishadach your daughter to his son, help him with parnasa and so on. But those are, that's not dveikus. When you hang around the Talmud Chacham and you support him and you help him, that's not dveikus. That's reverence, emulation, honor, respect. How can you literally fulfill the in of a hadbik with Talmidei Chachamim? So this is where Chassidus comes along and says that our neshama is connected to the Eibishter, to the neshama of the Rebbe. And the ultimate Chassidus, I don't want to spend another class on this, but the truth is this is a fabrengen that could never finish. I just spoke about the Tanya, yeah? The ultimate Chassidus is his kashrus and machasat Rebbe. The truth of Chassidus, the depth of Chassidus, the holiness of Chassidus, the sacrifice of Chassidus, the plateau of Chassidus is his kashrus. The idea that a Yid in his neshama is connected to the neshama of his Rebbe, of his Rosh B'nai Yisrael, his neshama klolis, and it's conscious. The neshama of the chassid feels an attachment to the neshama of his Rebbe, and obviously that's the culmination, that's the end, that's the graduation of living according to the Torah and the Eirah and the Adrach of his Rebbe in his generation, because this is how a Yid is connected to the Meibishter. But I was telling people over the weekend, just stop, I'm in the shul where I daven, the Kloisenberger Rebbe came up. So there's a story that's true. That the Kloisenberger Rebbe, at the end of his life, became very close to the Rebbe. He sent the Rebbe a message. And the message was that I know that the Rebbe thinks about me every day because I feel it. I know that the Rebbe thinks about it every day because I feel it. The highest Chassidus, really, the ultimate Chassidus is this kashrus of a Yita Tzaddik. We know, going back to the Baal Shem Tov, that Chassidus is about what they call emunas tzaddikim, right? Chassidus, the mainstream of Chassidus is having emunah, belief, faith in the words of a tzaddik, and not to question them and not to doubt them. But emunas tzaddikim is a basic idea. What does it mean? The Rebbe tells me I trust him. I believe him. I'll do whatever he says. His kashrus, it begins with that. But the ultimate kashrus is that it's mamish, a bond of a neshama and a neshama, v'nafshek shura b'nafshek, a connection of a neshama and a neshama. That for a person to be a chassid on this madrega, you have to be such a big bal madrega, because who's in touch with his neshama in the first place? Who feels his neshama, except at moments of mesiras nefesh or moments of tshuva? But in a shuv model, in a day-to-day model, who's in touch with the neshama? The idea of a person being sensitive and aware of his own neshama is an incredible refinement, an incredible whole openness. And then, on top of the connection that a Yid has with his neshama, that he should appreciate and experience at the pnimius of his neshama, the neshama of his Rebbe, of his tzaddik, of his Rebbe. And that's why it's Makusha with Atzma Sein Sof. This is really the this is the highest inyan in all of Chassidus. And that's why I told you the story last week, how the Alter Rebbe made a shidduch with Shalom Shachman, but Neach, he took him for his daughter. Because of the Iskasha, the Neach said in his last breaths, in my life I never did anything without my Rebbe. And the Chassidim heard him cry out, Ay Rebbe. His kashrus really is the deepest Chassidus. Because his kashrus is an expression of the neshama. So in Lamed Beis, the expression of the neshama is V'ahavta l'recha kamecha. In Perek Beis, his kashrus al dofka beis. By connection to a tzaddik, you're connected to Atzma Ein Sof Baruch. And again, I mentioned this last week, and I don't want to get all cooked up about this. It's not chas v'sholom astira ta'achtos. The Rebbe spoke about this in the Sikha in Perek Beis, Acham Shel Pesach, Tavshin Yud, that people Tanya, you're connected to the Eibishter through the Rebbe. We have only one God. So the Rebbe, in simple words, the Rebbe says it's a mamutza machaber. In other words, the reason the Rebbe connected to the Eibishter, or in as much as Rebbe, because he's a non-Metzias. Not because he is, because he isn't. That's the basis for the relationship. But putting the kashas aside, putting the questions aside, this is the very essence, the very heart, the very deepest truth of all of Chassidus. Not Chassidus Chabad, but especially Chassidus Chabad, is this kashas. The connection with the Yid in his neshama to his Rebbe, in the neshama of his Rebbe. And this is why there was such a deep, this Chassidim giving themselves to the Rebbe was so whole and so total, because they saw in their Rebbe not just a teacher, which is already an inyan. To have a Rebbe, someone who teaches and serve the Eibishter, is already extraordinary, because they appreciated the pnimiyas connection they have with the Eibishter. You know, the Alter Rebbe came to the Mezritcher Magid as a successful man like history never saw. The Alter Rebbe at the age of 18 and a half, when he showed up in Mezritcher, 19 and a half, was already then a super giant. And he was broken inside. Because two things bothered him. And one of them was that he didn't have a Rebbe. And when he met the Mezitcher Magid, the joy that he experienced, the Yetzias Mitzrayim, the going out of a constraint, the awareness that there is a man on this earth who could be my Rebbe. Not that he's going to teach me another page of Gemara, but he's going to not only teach me, but inspire me and connect me to Atzman. So saying, Son Baruch Hu was by the Alter Rebbe everything. When you're as big as the Alter Rebbe, you're looking for Dichalei, for the Eibishter himself, and this is where you found the Eibishter himself. In the Neshama of his Rebbe, in the Torah of his Rebbe, in the Adracha of his Rebbe. And that's why the Alter Rebbe's law for the Mezitcher Magid, there was no limit to the sense of gratitude and joy that the very presence of the Mezitcher Magid provided for the Alter Rebbe. So we're little teeny tiny chassidim, so we define his kashrus as we can, which is by action. You gotta do what you're told. I shouldn't say you, I have to do what I'm told. Every one of us has a mission on this earth that the Rebbe gave us, directly or indirectly. Everybody has words that the Rebbe told them. If you'll be misbinded, if you'll think about it, the Rebbe told you something at a yechidus, or whatever the case was, at a certain point in your life. If you'll think back, you'll remember you have such a moment. And that's a hirah. It's a hirah kol hachaim kulam. I'll tell you a beautiful story. A beautiful story. I know this person's name. I spent time in his home. I'm not going to tell you his name. And I'm not going to tell you where he lives either. But him and his wife were newly married. And they were young. They didn't have two nickels to rub together. Them gonish gahat. Didn't have mamish. Poor, starting out in life. I don't know what he was doing at the time, but he got involved in Yiddishkeit. He came to the Rebbe, got dollars. And his wife got pregnant. At a certain point during the pregnancy, they made a trip to Eretz Yisrael. He fell in love with Israel. He fell madly in love with Israel. And they were fresh by their tshuva. They had no roots here. We're going to move. So they come to their shliach. Tell their shliach that they want a big move to Israel. Okay. Then there were complications in the pregnancy. So the shliach says, you have to write to the Rebbe. And he says to him, why you're writing to the Rebbe about the complications in the pregnancy, mention to the Rebbe that you're thinking of making aliyah as a couple. He writes a letter to the Rebbe. Now remember, this is the person, you're not talking about someone who showed up in Lubavitch in 1967, where he had a yechidus and a second yechid. This was a person, the closest he got to the Rebbe was bracha v'atzlocha and $1. You understand? It's the generation of the Rebbe, the Gashmias, but it was very, very quick. He didn't have the feelings for the Rebbe that people who joined Lubavitch in the 60s and early 70s had, where they knew him and they knew that he knows them. Anyway, gets a letter in the mail, and the letter gives a bracha for the pregnancy and for a healthy child, healthy birth, and then there's a P.S. Regarding what you write about Eretz Yisrael, it's not advised. Period. Not advised. I think the letter was in English. So he comes to his shliach and says, what's this supposed to mean? I mean, come on, here I am, I've changed my whole life, I went to Israel, I fell in love with the country, I want to be amongst frum Jews. What does that mean it's not advised? In other words, he couldn't understand that when a man who never met you, who knows nothing about you, writes something to you in 5 words, that's Goyrali, has to do with your whole life. You gotta put aside your understanding. And it was a spiritual journey. It wasn't for, believe me, they're not moving to Israel to get rich. And the shliach was having a very difficult time convincing him. Rabbi Steinsaltz came through. Rabbi Steinsaltz was eingesucht and stark came to this base Chabad, which is someplace in America, for a Shabbaton. So he says to him, I have this situation. I think Steinsaltz. We have no concept of what it means a genius. We really don't understand. If Adin Steinsaltz was a misnagid, he would be Godel Shabbat. He would be. He's a giant. His problem is that he's never Chalabavche. But there's really the greatness of Adin Steinsaltz's mind and what he's done with his life. It's historic. I mean, it's Pashut. To come from his background, he's really a giant. He's mamish. Again, I'm not trying to. As is not too stark. Wir haben nicht kein Verstand. Wie bemattel everybody is. Bin ich Chabad. Ja, wisst doch. Bittel Idiot. This is my new slogan. Bittel, Idiot. But as I go to, that was reden. Anyway, and Steinsaltz speaks many languages. Steinsaltz knows science and mathematics. He also knows culture, literature. He knows everything. He just knows everything. On the tip of his tongue, I've heard people who are experts in literature, and they come to Mashmuas, and he's Eret Mitzay Nitna, Shava B'Shava, he knows what they don't know. He has an infinite mind, incredible mind. Anyway, so Rabbi Steinsaltz sits down with this young man. I heard from him directly. He's talking to him. What is the language that he employs? The Rebbe has given you a sacred mission. The Rebbe didn't tell him to do anything. The Rebbe, I don't think it's a good idea. The Rebbe has given you a sacred shlichus. And this is really a story about Rabbi Steinsaltz, his Chassidus himself. He says, the Rebbe is asking you to stay in Chutz La'aretz. This is your shlichus. He's not just telling you what not to do. By telling you what not to do, he's telling you what yes to do. And he had a conversation with him, and this resonated with him. The Rebbe wasn't telling him not to go to Eretz Yisrael. The Rebbe was telling him, stay here. This year today is a multi-millionaire. And he's a huge, he's a Chassidish Yid who davens every day for 2 hours, a Greise Gvir, and a huge supporter of Chabad, Lubavitch, in 1,000 ways. Very, very important Lubavitcher Chassid. He was a college student. And have 2 nickels. And Rebbe writes to him, moving there to Sarla is ill-advised. And he's mamish Chassidish Yid. He's not a modern, he's not Chabad light. His taina is how come Lubavitchers don't daven? He davens mit Azai. He's a real Chassidish mamish. It's remarkable. A few words from the Rebbe. Anyway, so he listened. And this is us. That's the Choislein and Folgen. You have to listen. And usually, and the thing about it is, when the Rebbe tells you, it sounds like a guy. You know, when you read stories of the Rebbe, they're amazing. When you watch the videos, you realize that it's so casual. The Rebbe's words fall out of him like as if he's just chatting. You have to remember it's Rebbe. Every tnuah, every motion, every word is Shchirim Daber is B'tech Gerene B'Payil Mamish. It's the words of God coming through in the Avodah Nevi'im. And you forget that. Because he's so nice, and he's so warm, and he's so available, and he's so like us. And yeah, the Yakas an jede Wort, you know, it says in Yenge, nu as Tzadik. Lachas kama v'kama shmias keli, a motion of a Tzadik. Lachas can hear his voice. Tzaddik alifer, shati shocha, I should never forget it. Anyway, okay, so we begged about his kashas. The truth, you can't really finish his kashas. His kashas is really what the Baal Shem Tov was about. But to the biggest tzaddikim, his kashas was on such a madrege, it was mamish a fabund zwischen a neshama met a neshama. Where the neshama of a yid, who's himself a Baal Madrege Goveya, senses consciously that he's makusha to atmas eitzof, his relationship with the Eibishter through his Rebbe. And there's no stiri with achtas. I have a story with a relative of mine. His family is not Lubavitcher. And he has a Zayde who was a vera geheben erid. Gor. He really was, you know, what the Rebbe would call a Chassidish erid. He was a geheben erid, a Talmud Chacham, a Yerishmai Merabim. In the Polish Welt, a Rebbe. A lot of his children, not all, but a lot of his children are Lubavitchers, but he has huge issues with the Rebbe. He has a lot of problems with the Rebbe, which I'm not going to go into. It's not important. But he told his grandchildren, he was makusher in the old country to a puppet Rebbe. Sigven tzaddikim, you know, there used to be real tzaddikim, on chochmas. And he told his Lubavitcher children, without realizing what a concession this is, that when he davens, and he wants to be mecham, his connection to the Eibishter, he's mitzayeh, the hadas kedush of his Rebbe. He has all the tightness to Lubavitch, but he's doing exactly the same thing. Not about your dad, but he feels like it's more emes, more genuine. You don't go around in the street, and every yokel is, I don't want to say the words that people describe about our relationship with the Rebbe. It's a pneumistic thing. For us, it's really about tzius, about doing what we're told. Really, it is. Okay, anyway, enough. I really did not intend on repeating this conversation on Esgashus, and I guess I should say I don't regret it. Let's move on. Okay, let's move on. So the Perek Beis is about the neshama, and we started off with the idea that a neshama is a chelik elakam mimal, mamish, and the idea of Yisol Olam Machshava, that the way the neshama is in hishtalshlus has to do with chachma. We moved on to the idea of diversification of neshamas, that even though all neshamas come from the same place, they don't end up the same way. And we gave the mashal from the tipas mayach av, one cell becoming the diverse different types of cells that makes up a human body, all the way until you have shaitis, v'tipanayim, hair and nails, which is so external, so peripheral compared to the mayach and to the lev, to the mind and to the heart and to the eyes and so on. And then he moved on to tzaddik, to Rebbe. Now, you need to understand how this all works. As if I understand it, I'm going to give you an expert's opinion on all of this, yeah? In kurze Welt, the Gemara says, Shleisha shut from beyond. The Gemara says, a person has three partners. Abba, ve'ima, ve'akadosh baruch hu matul bein neshama. There's a father and there's a mother, and the Eibishter puts in neshama. The Gemara in Masechta Nida actually specifies what you get from your father and what you get from your mother. And how do I say it? It's totally not scientific. There's no way to understand how what says in the Gemara reflects how science understands these things. But it would be a real eon for somebody to think these things through and understand what they mean. The Gemara lists this and this and this and this and this you get from your father, this and this and this and this and this you get from your mother. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu matul bein neshama. What's negate to us, what matters to us is this. Your neshama is notwithstanding your father and your mother. Your neshama is not about who your father is. It's not about who your mother is. It's about whatever the Rebbe decides. Now, that's a simplification. It's not the whole truth. Because usually if a father and a mother have small neshamas, their children are going to have small neshamas also. It doesn't happen every day that parents with klein and neshamalach bring a neshama into this world that's a giant. But it could happen. It absolutely could happen. Because it's not contingent. The neshama does not come from your father and your mother. The neshama comes from the Meibish. Now, usually, to bring a big neshama into the world, you have to have parents with great neshamas. But it's not necessarily the case. It's possible people with great neshamas should bring a neshama into this world. Should be a pashta neshama. And the opposite is also possible. Because even though in most cases that's the way it works, and it makes sense, because to bring a neshama from Gan Eden, from a higher world, you yourself have to be from a higher world. It's nevertheless true that they're independent. They're independent. I'll tell you a poilish shemaise. But I'm more than a poilish shemaise. Because the end of the story we all know. They were Belzer Ebbes. The Belzer Ebbes were very big tzaddikim. Gzei grace tzaddikim. Bemis. And there's two times a Belzer Rebbe met a Lubavitcher Rebbe, and you have the same Maisa. The Rebbe Marash met the first Belzer Rebbe, our Rebbe met the last Belzer Rebbe, and in both cases they try to hide who they were, and you can't hide. The Tzemach Tzedek said to the Rebbe Marash, you thought you're going to fool him? Thank you very much. Von der offene Balruach HaKedesh, as like how are you going to fool the Shalom Belzer? Ridiculous. They were very big tzaddikim. The second Belzer Rebbe, they call him the Mitleruv. The Mitleruv. The Bishila Belzer. Had a son whose name was Bishachar Dave. He was the third Belzer Rebbe. The Bishachar Dave Belzer, I know Yidden who knew him personally. He told me he was a king in Poland. He was a melech. He was a zafanim. Someone described Gedele Yisrael, Rabbi Yosef Engel. Rabbi Yosef Engel used to stand in front of the Belzer Rebbe with 300 was. Ik ben zeer a grote Rebbe. And I mean it in the true sense of the word. So he married, the third Belzer Rebbe, married a Chaldan of Einik. The Baruch Chernobyl is a talk. So this is how Belzer Chernobyl gets together. You're not interested in this, and I don't know what I'm talking about. I mean, I sound like I'm a big expert. I don't know anything. I did beats that I take, what's the word? Kapteim gewesen. I tasted from here, from there. Anyway, the bottom line is she kept losing her pregnancies. They got married. The Bishachar Dave Belzer, the son of the second Belzer Rebbe, married his wife, and she was a Bas Kedeshim. She came from a very chashuv Rebbe Mishpacha, and the Chernobyl Mishpacha. They said, Nacham Chernobyl Zeiniklach. And she lost one pregnancy, and the second pregnancy, and the third pregnancy. And people told her, Alle kommen zum Shved. Everybody comes to your father and asks for a bracha. Ask him for a bracha. So she finally, she was reluctant to do it. She went into her Shved, and she told her father-in-law, I need a bracha, I keep losing my pregnancies. So I'll say it in English, I'm going to save time. The Belzer Rav says to her, you should have had children long ago. There's nothing wrong with you. There's no reason. Your husband insists. Your husband insists in bringing an neshama into this world that has not been here in 500 years. Has the mice. Has better. Dein Mann action that is going to bring an neshama into this world that hasn't been in 500 years. And we know who that son was. The Paltiel. And he was, the Rebbe described him as a tzura b'lichaim and mufshet from Gashmias. A physical human being was a neshama, no goof. The man never ate and never slept. It's nishka guzme, not a guzme. He lived 77 years. Nobody knows what kept his neshama and goof together. So it's just a mice. It's not exactly happening to me or you. You're not bringing. It's a peilish mice, it's a toichni. It's a Chabad mice because it's a mice with a toich. The story has substance, has a pnimius. And I believe it. I really believe it. If you understand who the Battle of Belzer was, the Belzer Rebbe, the Frierdiker Belzer Rav, you appreciate that this is serious. It's nicht gelechte. Weißt du, von a Meise. Okay, I don't want to get ahead of myself. The point is, and there's other stories that I could tell you. Usually, the size of the neshama of the parents will have an impact on the size of the neshama of the child. But that's the way it works out. But in principle, the Shleisha Shutfim, each partner puts his thing into the mix and then they stir the pot. Abba ve'ima and HaKadosh Baruch Hu matal bein neshama. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu matal bein neshama has nothing to do directly with the parents. Even though the reality is that it works out, that smaller neshamas bring children to the world with lesser neshamas, but it isn't bound. It's not the ma'akev. Because neshama has nothing to do with the father and the mother. So how does the Alter Rebbe finish this Perek? Having established I'm sorry. Having established that the neshama is a chelik elakam mamish, and even though we now learned that there's neshamas agabe neshamas, there's different types. There's reish b'nei Yisro, and there's ikve the Mashiach, and the Rebbe used to say ikve the heel of Mashiach. There's all kinds of neshamas, big neshamas, little neshamas, tiny neshamas, etc., etc., etc. This is all the unilateral act of God. This is the Eibishter's contribution to the birth of a child. Now the Rebbe finishes the Perek by saying it's not so simple. Even though it's a fact that the neshama, which this Perek has been talking about, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu matal bein, it has nothing to do with the father and the mother, but the parents can affect how the neshama expresses itself. In other words, the neshama is the Eibishter's choice. Little people can have a child with a big neshama, big people can have a child with a smaller neshama, big people can have a child with a big neshama, little people have children with little neshamas. But there is something that the father and the mother affect that affects the neshama of the child indirectly. So let's read it now inside. It says in Kabbalah's father, which means that the parents' behavior and the parents' thought affect the neshama of the child. And as opposed to the children of simple people, since the parents don't have the right thoughts and so on and so forth, they affect the neshama of the child. So the Alter Rebbe is asking a question. Is the neshama determined by the Eibishter, HaKadosh Baruch Hu matal bein neshama, or to put it in context? We just learned about L'davka Bey, that all the neshamas of the generation are connected to the Nasi Adar, the tzaddik of the generation, and he makes that determination. So is it the father and the mother, or is it the Eibishter? That's the kasha. The Zohar seems to suggest that the parents choose the neshama, says the Alter Rebbe name. Hainu, the answer is no. Don't misunderstand. The neshama has nothing to do with the father and the mother. Nothing. The neshama has to do with the Eibishter. But the neshama comes into the guf, and the guf has to do with the father and the mother. And the Rebbe here uses a Kabbalistic term. There's also something called levusha. Levusha means garments, layers, physical layers, and metaphysical layers, spiritual layers. So the neshama itself is a choice of the Eibishter that has zero to do with the parents, but the ability for that neshama to show itself has to do with the kiddush. Let's read it inside. Hainu mishum, the teretz is she'ein loch hanefesh loch neshama. Because even though, and I'm translating it contextually, not literally, even though the neshama's choice is God's, but she'ein la levush, but the neshama has garments, and every neshama, the biggest tzaddik and the biggest rasha, the levushim are minefesh the atzmas of avayimeh, have to do with the neshama of the parents. So the neshama itself is taka the Eibishter's choice, and the parents have nothing to do with it. But the ability for the neshama to express itself, how easy or how difficult it's going to be for that neshama to surface and to emerge, this the parents affect through what's called levush, and therefore the Zohar indicates that the neshama of the child has to do with the parents, even though it doesn't. It's that Rebbe is teaching us. The neshama itself is chosen by God. In the show, there's a lot of stories. Sometimes they tell stories of people who had very simple neshamas, who turned out to be very great, because their parents were very old. Sometimes you have people whose neshamas are very great neshama, small, what do I say? So the person has a very small neshama, but there's a lot of kiddush, the neshama shows itself. On the other hand, you have great neshamas, and for whatever reasons, the neshama cannot come out. I'll tell you soon a story about that. And he continues. And every mitzvah, every yid does, hakel ad the eisha alabush v'cholu. Right, we're going to learn in Tanya later. It's going to become a big piece of our discussion. That any time you do a mitzvah, you do it with the nefesh halakis. Every time you do an aveda or a stam thing, you do it with the nefesh habamis. Every time you do a mitzvah, you do it with the nefesh halakis. When you learn Torah and do mitzvahs, it's coming from the neshama. And the neshama has layers, as we're going to be learning. There's the etzem neshama, there's the koiches nefesh, and the levush nefesh, which we're going to be learning about in chapter 3, koiches nefesh, and chapter 4, levush nefesh. Says the Alter Rebbe, anything a Jew does that is good and Jewish has to do with the neshama, but it has to do with this levush, which has to do with the parents as well. Hakel al yedei eisi halavush v'chuli. It has some relationship to the levush that the parents give. So understand, says the Alter Rebbe, the neshama is the Eibishter's. It has nothing to do with the parents in essence, in what it is. No matter whether it's a big neshama or a little neshama, the Eibishter makes that choice unilaterally. But the neshama's expression has to do with kiddush. And the idea that every mitzvah we do and every piece of Torah we learn, all the good we do coming from the nefesh halakis, coming from the godly soul, is true. But it's also true that all the good we do, it comes from the kiss, depends on this levush. And because it depends on this levush, the situation with this levush determines how it's going to be able to function. So the first thing he says is called a mitzvah. So all the mitzvahs you do, hakel al yedei eish al levush mentions garment. And then he says another thing. Va'afilu hashafa sheneisnim lei min hashamayim. The flow that comes from heaven to earth to this person is also hakel al yedei levush, comes with his garment. Now I'm going to go out on a limb. What does shefa mean? Usually shefa means parnasa, health. I don't think that's what this means over here. Shefa over here means ruchnius dike shefa. Based on nu chekli Yisrael hu mishpat l'kei yankel. It doesn't see this. That just like in Rosh Hashanah they determined your gashmi is the parnasa. Chekli Yisrael hatifeni lechem mechuki mishpat l'kei yankel. They determine how much getlachkeit you're going to have. So first of all, your success in Torah and mitzvahs, which has to do with your neshama, depends on this levush as well. Second of all, the infusion of inspiration from heaven, shefa sheneistim min hashamayim, is also idea levush there. So even though on the one hand, parents don't make the determination about the neshama at all, the Eibishter does. The parents have to do with the goof. The father contributes his parts, and the mother contributes hers. But because of this levush, they indirectly affect both how the neshama functions as a yid in terms of Torah and mitzvahs, as well as in terms of how much shefa and neistim min hashamayim. Okay, and consequently, if there is a holiness, yamshich levush kadesh lenishmas b'nei. So even though the neshama is made by the Eibishter, the free expression of that neshama through the guf is determined by this kiddush, and therefore va'afilu hi neshama gedela. The biggest neshama is tzricha lekiddush avachulu, needs this holiness, needs this sanctification, because it affects the ability of the neshama to express itself through the guf. There's a story, I was going to wait till the end of the Pedic, but I'm itching to tell it. Rabbi Isaac Homler. Rabbi Isaac was sehr groß. Rabbi Isaac Homler. Rabbi Isaac Homler was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. Now the word chassid of the Alter Rebbe should make you tremble. What is achos of the Alter Rebbe? It's bemis. It's a haflod. Alter Rebbe's chassidim. Rabbi Eisel was in the big chassidim in Alter Rebbe. The Friedrich Rebbe writes about him such wonderful accolades. Harav Hagon Hoamiti Ish Ha'ashkel. Harav Achos Rav Hagon Hoamiti. He was a giant. Rabbi Eisel. When Rabbi Eisel came to the Alter Rebbe, he was a younger man. He was probably a teenager, and they nicknamed him the Zibelel, the Zibele, and they teased him his whole life. He lived a very long life. He probably had. I'm assuming he had a brach from Alter Rebbe Barichas Yavim because he probably lived 90 years. He passed away 9 years before the Tzemach Tzedek. He could have been the Tzemach Tzedek's father. Rabbi Eisel, they teased him Zibele. Zibele means the one of seven. Why? Because by the time he came to Alter Rebbe, he was a teenager. He had already reviewed the Shas 7 times. And Rabbi Isaac had a minig Yisrael Teiri that every year at a Pesach he was a bchor. He was the firstborn. He made a siyum on the whole Shas every single year. Du verstehst what the Yidus is, yeah? And Rabbi Isaac couldn't understand why Chassidim chapters after that. Whenever Chassidim got together, that he was a punching bag. And it wasn't like today where you create your own Chassidus by standing on the other guy. The Alter Rebbe's Chassidim. Alter Rebbe's Chassidim were genuine, and they loved each other. And when they rubbed each other, they were trying to help each other grow in avodah, not trying to help themselves grow on political points. So Eisel couldn't understand why he seems to be more of a target than others. So he went out to Rabbi Yechidus. And he said to the Alter Rebbe, and he was not asking this question, he was complaining, like the kid who complains to the teacher when that when you walk out of the room, the kids make fun of me. He wanted to understand what was the message. Momaila. Why is it that Chassidim chepezach mer metem vi mit andere? It was just the way it worked out. So the Alter Rebbe told him, you should know you have a neshama d'atzilus. Neshama d'atzilus. He says, but the levushim are not the way they're supposed to. There's a chasam in the levush. So the Eibishter is arranging b'ashgocha pratis that Chassidim should be meshafshek on Ragbim, so that the neshama could emerge. This is a story. It's brought down. In the Toldos of Isaac Hamelin, this is the story that's told. He said, you should know you have an incredibly great neshama. And your neshama is begging to be released. And there's a problem with this lavush that the Alter Rebbe is describing here. And that's why Chassidim bad. But let's finish the page. Aval neshama atzma. In as much as the neshama itself is concerned, hine lepiyamim, it happens on occasion that nishmas adam gavoya leyein case. You can have the neshama of a giant of giants. Baal lihiyes can come to be. Benoi, the son, shall adam nivza v'shafa v'chuli, the lowliest of people. Now the pshutei shal mikra of these words is, I want you to know that the neshama is not about the father, the neshama is not about the mother, the father is Levin, the mother is Aiden, HaKadosh Baruch Hu matul bein neshama, the neshama comes from the Meibishter, period. So this doesn't change. Sometimes you have a neshama of the greatest of greats who has appearance of Pashat Yidin. Pashat Yidin. Arzeicha have a great neshama because the neshama is the term of the Eibishter. Okay, later on in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe is going to repeat this in chapter 18 in Perek Yudches. Here it says, Mipnei shahayu be'imka klipis. In chapter 18, the Alter Rebbe brings the same idea, and he says the likelihood of simple parents bringing a great neshama to this world has to do with some kind of a mystical complexity. But azoi, its true standard, small parents of a small neshama will have children with a small neshama. Parents with a giant neshama can have children with a giant neshama. But it's about the Eibishter. There can be exceptions, and even the exceptions can have some kind of a connection to mystical complexities, imprecision, crossing of the wires. But the bottom line is this: on the elementary level, the neshama is chosen by the Eibishter. The father contributes his, the mother contributes hers, and the Eibishter gives the neshama. But parents have to understand the chinuch that you give your child, or the vushim that you give the child, in all aspects, in all levels, determines how difficult or easy it's going to be for that neshama to emerge. And the Alter Rebbe finishes, Kol K'meshe Kosov Harizal. Because Harizal writes, Kol Zebu Kutetei Parshas Vayera, or B'taimei HaMitzvahs Parshas Bereishis. And the Rebbe writes, this is a reference to the last few lines, not to the whole Pedic, but the last few lines, that even though the neshama is determined by the Eibishter, the parents have a hand. Now, we finished Pedic Beis. We can't say finished. We completed. We ended. We read all the way to Pedic Beis. It's even possible, I don't know if it's going to be next Sunday, so there's Chedesh Kislev, David Brennan, a fire, a good fire, a warm fire, a lichtige fire, Eish versus Mechamim or Nish Seirif. It warms, it doesn't burn. So we'll have to see what the schedule is going to be. But there's a distinct possibility that next Sunday we could start Pei Gimel. Okay, so I just want to say it one more time in conclusion that the Alter Rebbe finishes the Peirik by explaining some of the pathology of the relationship between a person's neshama and his conscious self. The neshama is the Tumah, the Eibishter. But parents have a huge influence before the child is born and during the pregnancy and after the child is born to affect the ability of that neshama to emerge, which is why the Rebbe spoke so much about all kinds of different things that affect the health of a child spiritually, beginning with Taras HaMishpacha, and then the Rebbe spoke about Shir HaMalas, right? The Rebbe spoke about Shir HaMalas. That made a very big deal. Remember that? It was a whole campaign that when a woman goes into the hospital, she should bring with her the Shir HaMalas. It's the mitzvah of the Rebbe's, that even though everybody knows after a baby is born, so if you have a boy, the moil comes along. The way Moilim advertises, they have these Shir HaMalas, and they put on the bottom Rabbi El Yeshein Moil Mumche, or whoever happens to be the Moil who you asked to do a bris milah on your son, and for your daughters you put up the ones you got from the Moil when the boy was born. If you, this is a girl, then you never have to go to a store and buy one. But the Rebbe made a mitzvah that when you go to the hospital you should take it. And the Rebbe said that people are going to say that maybe the hospital's not going to let it, or there could be a shaila from Davak Sheba Gedusha when there's not tznius, a woman is in labor. So put it in a bag or 2 bags, you put it under the pillow, and of course he didn't put in a dollar from the Rebbe, the picture of the Rebbe, which is the real Shemitah. This is not only Dvarim Gashmi, something about the health of the mother, how the baby is doing in the Neshama. Before, middle, after, and then of course when a child is raised, all the things that the Rebbe spoke about, what children should see and not see, and how children should be raised, this affects the ability of the child's Neshama to emerge as an adult. Taka. Take that right. You remember that is the kiddush. The kiddush was an Eltern. Correct. Right. I remember the word. I forgot where I saw it. The Rambam's parents, the kiddush. Very good. Yashkar, thanks for that reminder. Richtig.